Okay, so I hope that everyone is back. That's because this is online. Okay, so what was I going to say? I was going to say things. Right. I wanted to talk about Irina Metzler. So, one of the main reasons that you and I are sitting here today, besides Hanna Björk, of course, is because of this amazing scholar called Irina Metzler. Irina Metzler is, in fact, one of the first people that. Oh wait, this is not an. Oh, it is recording. Is it recording? It's recording. So one of the reasons is indeed Irina Metzler, and Irina Metzler, an amazing scholar who was, it's hard to say ever that someone is the first of anything, but one of the first, clearly the most important medieval scholar who introduced disability studies into medieval studies. And when you read her texts, then you feel the sense of urgency. It's like when she's writing, you feel like she piles up so much information. And it really feels like she has something very important to say, and she will say it. And yeah, it's quite a forceful text. I'm sure it's very easy to get lost in because of the amount of information, but it's also great. I mean, I was randomly read a line there that actually helped me to develop an argument about deafness that had nothing to do with what she wrote, just because she gave so much information that you can really build on that information. Yeah, so one important thing, of course, you all, I'm assuming, know the difference between disability and impairment. She only uses the word impairment. So impairment is kind of like her, even though the book is called Disability, her framework is the social model. And one important point that she has is, in other words, one may be born impaired, but one is made disabled. Right? She writes, to paraphrase Simone de Beauvoir's famous dictum on women. So for students of disability studies, this might not be too shocking a revelation, but I mean, depends on the stage you are. Maybe you're still very early in it, and it still is. But indeed, what she looks into and what she shows is to what degree certain things that we consider disabling are not necessarily disabling. But one thing that I do like is that she also warns against what she calls the vanishing bodies of postmodernism, in that impairment is a very real biological fact. So again, you can't write it away as kind of a matter of discourse, because some things can be ignored, but some things cannot. It's very important. Another key thing, so I'm going back in my points here, another key thing that she stresses is the fact that it's not the dark ages, it's the Middle Ages. So the reason that it's so important for her, why dark? Why is dark ages a problem? Because there's this collective view. You still see it. Just a few weeks ago, I heard some politician talking about, oh, we don't want to go back to the Middle Ages, with the implication that the Middle Ages are this dark and sad time of suffering. I mean, yeah, certainly the Middle Ages had suffering in them, but so does modern times, right? I know there's certain, how do you say, certain surveys that will show that the general happiness went up. Could be. I'm not a economic scholar, but it's also not correct to say that everything is better. I mean, as I showed earlier with the homosexuality as disease, right? As a disorder. There were periods of time where being gay was not an issue, and then it became an issue, and then it wasn't an issue again. And now in certain parts of the US, people are talking about it being an issue again. So, it's the point is that things are, is transient the word I'm looking for? Things move, things change, I guess. Something fell. Okay, so this is why it's very important for her to stress it's the Middle Ages, not the Dark Ages. There were a variety of responses to impairment, and it's very important. So, here. Okay, so yes. Yeah, some of the points here I don't want to go too much into, but one of the main points that she talks about is how one of the things she refutes, and is maybe one of her most important empirical observations that have been contested, is that she refutes the notion of impairment as punishment for sin. So, right, there's this, again, this very often you think about, oh, right, this person is doesn't have a leg because God was angry at him. And this is very important, because she says that's not the case. She says, no, God wasn't angry, and they didn't think that God was angry. They did think, however, as I'll expand a bit in a second, they did think that God treated or cured the person, but they didn't think that their condition was caused by sinfulness. And that is another thing. And this is, again, this kind of changing of, she tries to show that there wasn't as much stigma as we might perceive. And then in response to her, in the text that you read, Joshua Ayler says, one cannot help but think that the claim there were very few medieval, my pocket is bothering me. There were very few medieval disabled people is a bit extreme, no matter how narrowly the terms are defined. So there's criticism of her texts. The most important criticism. So first of all, it's just important for me to, like, before we move on, to kind of establish Irina Metzer, super important, right? Super important scholar. And she's the one that in many ways brought disability studies to medieval studies. But as things are, things develop, and one of the important responses are, so she uses the social model, and as we know, Tom Shakespeare, all that, we know that it's problematic to just follow the social model. The social model has a very certain focus. The disability, what Joshua Ayler here is kind of referring to is this kind of separation also between impairment and disability. And it's kind of funny, right? Because she's talking about the biological fact about the disappearing bodies of postmodernism, but it sometimes seems like she's bringing it back there. But, I mean, this isn't to negate the importance of her work. And, sometimes you need to go to one extreme in order to fix another extreme, because what she shows is that before her, most histories of disability kind of glanced over the Middle Ages and just showed that the Middle Ages were a time of evil, or, a time of sinfulness, and treating disabled people as very badly. Okay, but then came Wheatley. I'll go back to him later, but he focuses on blindness. But beyond blindness, he suggests another mode of thinking about disability in the Middle Ages. And what he talks about is, he says, yeah, sure, there's this social model, and he doesn't really negate the social model, but he says that there's another element that's not complete. And what's complete in his I want to say in his eyes. Later on, I'll talk about why that's problematic language, but in his eyes, what's problematic, what's incomplete, is the fact that there is a role that Christianity plays. So, how do I frame this? So, he suggests what he calls the religious model. It's a discursive model. It's a way of talking when talking about disability. In a way, so he connected to the medical model, disability as absence of full health, as need of remedy, but it's what came before the medical model. So the medical model being looking at disability as something that needs to be fixed. So before that, there was the religious model, but it wasn't just needing to be fixed, it needs to be fixed by God. or the saints. Again, it's or the saints as mediators to God. It's also very complex, and it's also it's easy to simplify this. But yes, for now, this is how we'll present it, because if I start explaining what's going on in my head, it will explode. So I should remind you that I'm still somewhat sick. Church. Just reading from the PowerPoint. So the main point that Wheatley is making is that there was a very, very strong connection between the church and disabled people, and specifically in his case, blind people, but disabled people. And now it got into an awkward silence. So it's not the way, it is a response to Metzelder, because you can find cases where someone sinned, and even me, I mean, I found a few cases in Old Norse texts where there's someone who behaved badly and became disabled. But it's rare. It is rare, or at least in the cases that I've read, but it's not that it's not present. But the main point is that there was that by taking it to that extreme, what she might be ignoring is the fact that there is a very, very, very deep connection between the church and the disabled people. And this is because the church itself needed people with disability to make manifest the work of Christ, right? They needed to show, look, we can heal these people. And of course, they said it was the work of the saints, but as is indicated also in a story that I will touch upon later, they were both places of healing, but also of saintly healing, but they were also places of medical healing. And the two kind of came together. There was also a financial consideration. If you make a very famous, a very rich patron see, then that very rich patron might start dedicating their money to your church and elevating its status, and you can buy more wax. Because that's what they were all about, wax, in the Middle Ages. Another thing is, so, yeah, the discussion of kind of charity is kind of problematic, because it kind of maybe implies a passivity, and as we will see later, but there's a lot of it's not docile bodies. The kind of Foucault kind of people aren't docile necessarily, but charity does help, I guess. And indeed, people that you consider people that have impairments, or in this case, he uses the word disability, can work. So they're not necessarily disabled in the sense of not being able to work, right? In the capitalist perception of disability. So this is kind of like this intermix between the church and disabled people. The church needed people with disability to come and be healed, and the disabled people often wanted to be healed or find some ease for if they have chronic pain or something. So sometimes it wasn't really the issue of, oh, I lost my arm. Okay, I lost my arm. It's very hard to regain your arm, I guess, unless you have stem cells or something. But it is possible maybe to get rid of phantom pains or something, right? Maybe there's certain treatments, maybe there's certain things that you can do to get rid of certain chronic pains, or at least to ease chronic pains, or learn how to deal with chronic pains. So therefore, yeah, hopefully that helped, that explained. Okay. Yeah. So another example of the kind of issues of the religious model is that he gives, that Wheatley gives, is the exclusion of the blind and visually impaired from the elevatio, right? The fact that, when I don't know, I'm Jewish, but the bread is kind of risen, and they all say, "Oh, it's risen," and then if you can't see, then you're not saved. Oh, well, that sucks. That's an example. Yeah. Okay. So, wait. Okay. Okay, so another thing. So now I'm going to go a bit more into things that have been said about disability from other perspectives in medieval studies, kind of to show you the richness of what has been done. I really like this example, this book by Richard H. Godden, sorry, not Good, just yeah, okay, and Assa Simon Mittman. So one is Richard Godden. He's not Old Norse. He's a medievalist disability studies scholar. Assa Simon Mittman is a monstrosity scholar or monster theory scholar, and they both. So there's a scholar called Jeffrey Jerome Cohen, and they use his scholarship as kind of like a basis. And by using kind of like this research, they try to show the various aspects of monstrosity and how it also connects to disability. So so basically this article written by Jeffrey Jerome Cohen, where he offers different ways of interpreting the monster. He calls a monster seven theses. So one of them is the monster is a manifestation of our fears and desires. When we gaze upon a disabled person, we remember our fears, I guess. Yeah, it's like ageism, right? When you see an old person, you remember that you yourself will be old one day. Yeah. Then the monster body, and this is something we're getting to a lot. The monster body is a cultural body, one that incorporates fear, desire, anxiety, and fantasy. Again, the body is constructed. I'll talk about it more later, but it's again something that comes back again and again. The body is something that's read. It's like a texture. Yeah, so much to say about that. Sala Kunzler has a great book about that. It also reminds me of David Carrillo Rangel and other many people. Of course, the scholar that I refer to later. So I'll stop trying to figure out the name. Okay, so so like the medical model, or in a way also like the religious model, you have to find a monster and you have to kill it. And that's very uncomfortable when it comes to kind of like, that's very uncomfortable when it comes to disabled people, right? Like you want to, because if someone appears like a monster, is that a reason to kill them? If the society understands a body in a certain way, is that what we necessarily want to judge? I don't know. I don't think so. But rather than create a distance between us and the monster or the person or disabled person, looking at monster studies and disability studies together help us see how our construction of such categories implicate all of us and our fantasies of normality and wholeness. So yeah, both the monster and the disabled person, they both reveal how we think of a certain normal, what is normal, and by leaving from that normal, we might be categorized as monstrous, we might be categorized as disabled, or in some cases, we might be categorized as a disabled monster. There's another really important thing, is the fact that the character, the character that makes someone, the thing that makes someone disabled, or in this case monstrous, is not something that's inherent to the person. The person isn't monstrous. Of course, if we're talking about a person, a monster is a monster, I guess. I mean, if monsters exist, I'm sitting out on that. But yes, if monsters do exist, okay. But a person who is categorized as a monster, or in the case, the kind of concept that Rebecca Merkelbach talks about is social monstrosity. There's nothing inherent in the person, but rather something that society constructs around them that makes them seem monstrous. And yeah, I really like this example of this little guy, detail of monster crippled. So this is in the book, that this is an introduction of Mittman and Godwin. And what's really cool about this image is, first of all, its location. It's like in the lower part of an initial, where above it there's kind of like a description of a battle, so you can see that. But you can see this character, he has this like booth, stool where he puts his leg. I'm saying his because, but of course it's a monster. I think they might be better. Very hairy, but there's an injury there, and you can see the wrapping around their foot. And you can see that they're using a cane. There's a lot of things here that are both, that characterize this specific figure as both disabled and as monstrous. But this tongue out, the way that they describe it when they talk about this text, there's something very daring, something very audacious about this character. It's not very ashamed. They're not very ashamed of what they are. Yeah, but obviously this looks like, this could be a war wound. This could be, in a way, you could look at this image as actual criticism of how people treat people with war wounds, war-related injuries. So, you look at the person who is asking for money because they just participated in a fight for King Arthur, and now you're not giving them a dime. Second. So yeah, they describe the image. You can press pause and you can read what they write. Oh, this is okay. I can't. I'm sorry. I very often say that I'm gonna not read something, but then I do. I mean, what they stress is the fact that this creature is not a passive. It's not the way we kind of perceive disability. It's very, he's, I think they say little guy, he. So let's say he for now. He is very active. He's seeking out money, right? Presumably from his hand gesture. He's not ashamed, looking up, very, very, yeah, well, not ashamed. He's nothing like the way that we tend to perceive disability. Now, two researchers that I do really enjoy in this book, it's just an example, but Emily Koch and Patricia Skinner have a discussion of the face and how a dysfunctional, like a face that is either suffered mutilation or born with some physical difference, how these faces are received as monstrous. And it's very interesting. A point that also comes back a lot is the story matters. If I lost my nose because I had, what is that thing you lose your nose with? Is it the thing where you don't eat fruit? You know what I'm talking about. The thing that you don't eat fruit. So if you lose your nose because I didn't eat enough fruits, it's not, and people, sorry, so, and then the people around me know I didn't eat my fruit and I lost my nose. I'm still good old Yoav for them, right? Maybe no one will want to date me, but they, maybe, I don't know. But I mean, depends on how important my nose was for them. But won't change the way they, see me as a part of their society. However, let's say I now move to the village right next to me, and so I moved to the village right next to me, and there is people don't know my story and how I didn't eat fruit and therefore lost my nose. So anything could have happened. Maybe my nose was removed because as a punishment, right, for stealing, which often there was like physical. This is something I talked a lot about with Hanna Björk Sigurjónsdóttir, Hanna Björk. Yeah, physical punishment, removing a certain organ from the face as punishment. You don't know how the person lost their nose, right? So yeah. Another example is kind of like the character of the supercrip. So I'm not going to go into that today, but there is some really good things written about the character of the supercrip. I think it was Shaki. I can send you references if you want. Very interesting. In this specific case, something I think about a lot is the fact that super ability is very often conflated with disability. So the fact that a monster is very often just someone who's so strong that it's exceptional. So if your little boy runs under the truck and suddenly lifts the truck, you don't think, wow, my boy is so strong. No, you think, what a monster. My boy is in the point where he says a lot of, like, he says very often like that he's strong because he lifts things. I mean, he is a very strong boy, but yeah. Anyway, so if he lifts a car, then that's definitely something that you will not expect to see a young child do, and therefore might freak you out a bit, and therefore you might think of your child or a child as a monster. I mean, I'll never think of my beautiful son as a monster, but general. Yeah. Yes. So yeah, I'm not going to go into the narrative prosthesis concept. It's a concept I'm trying to actually avoid because I'm very, well, Hanna Björk can talk about, I'm sure she talked about it with you guys, and if not, but sorry, I'm also trying to not say the word guys too much with you, y'all. But it's a problematic concept that Hanna Björk has a much better grasp than I do about. That being said, it is interesting that all narratives operate out of a desire to compensate for a limitation or to rein in access. So basically, all texts try to bring things into this kind of equilibrium, and that's true about anything. But I mean, about most stories, right? Happily ever after. You want the characters to go back. The sitcom, there always has to be a kind of like an equal point. Yes. So now I will not read the next story because it is far too long. However, I will read segments of this story. I'll give you a bit of background first. So, The Prose Life of Cuthbert, circa 721, written by Bede. This is in the medieval source book published by Punctum, and this specific text is discussed in that volume by Marie Tronen. That's why it says contributed by Marie Tronen, and we'll go back to her observations in a few minutes. Now, this is text in Anglo-Saxon, Old English text, written discussing the miracles of this lovely chap, Cuthbert, written by Bede. Cuthbert was at some point the guy who led Lindisfarne, who you may or may not know is where the Vikings first attacked. So yes, this is this guy, but this was before they attacked, way before, like 150 years, I think, before. And this is actually not about him. This is about a person who was healed through his operations. Now, it's a list of, so a prose life, it's very often you have like the life of the saint, and then you kind of have a list of miracles, of things that, things that were done to cure certain people, disabilities and other stuff. So here's a case of a person, a young man that has paralysis, and he goes to Lindisfarne, and he tries to get the people there, the abbot and the brethren, to and the bishop to heal him. So they attended to him with the utmost care and used all their skills in medicine, but without effect. So it's very important to note, used all their skills in medicine. This person went there first in order to get the skillful physicians there, right? Not in order to get saintly help, because this was a place of healing. Being thus given over by all worldly physicians, he had recourse to him who is in heaven. So basically, well, this doesn't help me, then I guess I'll go to the other method of healing that I have, which is praying. The poor man, I wish I had the Latin here, because I'm not sure if it's the poor man as in, oimingi, or is it like, what's it called? Not being psych. Fautaikur. So I'm not sure if it's fautaikur or if it's oimingi, but yeah, the poor man begged of his attendant to bring him something which had come from the incorruptible body of the holy man, for he believed that by means thereof he might, with the blessing of God, return to health. So then I'll continue reading. The attendant, having first consulted the abbot, brought the shoes which the man of God had worn in the tomb, and having stripped the poor man's feet naked, put them upon him, for it was in his feet that the palsy had first attacked him. Okay, so as you see, what's most interesting, and this is something that Marie Tonen points out, is the fact that this guy is nothing like passive. He's nothing. He's like this guy, right? He's actively trying to figure out how to deal with his issues. So in this case, he asks his attendant to bring him something. And, he goes to Lindisfarne, right? There's nothing passive about this chap. And so after all this praying and this stuff, he found his nerves and the joints of his limbs suddenly endowed with inward strength. I wish I had that myself, feeling like not great. His pains were gone, and perceiving that he was cured, he arose, and in standing posture spent the whole time of the midnight or matins song in thanksgiving to God. In the morning he went to the cathedral, and in sight of all the congratulating brethren, he went round all the sacred places, offering up prayers and the sacrifice of praise to his Savior. The importance of this is that our good chap friend person is that he, obviously now he will go and tell people, oh, you have to come to Lindisfarne. It's where all the cures are. It's where it's at, brother. Which I guess the Vikings heard, and maybe that's why they came. Probably not. Silly joke, but that's the point. The more people that the more word of mouth there is about the healing nature of your establishment, the more money you will receive. And of course, he does go around with his, I guess when you say poor, he wasn't poor, but rather gave away, money and stuff. Okay, so this is Montgonen, and this is some points that she makes. Again, the person who kind of in punctum in this, it's called, I have a reference here. It's a sound still mind, personal agency of impaired people in Anglo-Saxon care and cure narratives. In E. Connolly and Sala Kunsel, S. Kunsel, New Approaches to Disease, Disability, and Medicine in Medieval Europe. So it's not Sala Kunzler, but it's S. Kunsel. Sorry. Okay, so Marie Tonen, her PhD is about the research of disability in the kind of early medieval England, what is referred to as Anglo-Saxon. It is important to address the term Anglo-Saxon in case you ever decide to use it. The term Anglo-Saxon is often seen these days as a very racist term. It was not, no connection to it, but it's seen these days as a very racist term because in America and the US, people who identify as Anglo-Saxon are very often, the WASP, white Anglo-Saxon Protestant, some sort of like identity marker that is associated with white supremacy and all that. Whole debate in the in Anglo-Saxon early medieval England academia about this. But the point is just to use it carefully is what I'm trying to say. I don't really have an opinion because I'm not an Anglo-Saxonist or an early medieval English circle. So I don't know which is the correct term, but be careful if you use it, and always caveat it. It's always better to be careful. You don't want to insult people is the main point, I think. So I want to talk about her concept of agency also. So what is agency? I'm not a social scientist yet. Maybe one day. But when we talk about agency, we talk about the amount of control that someone has over their own body, their own fate. And what Marie Tronen is really all about is about control of body and fate, and how much power did this person have? How much power did this person have over their own fate? And like here, it's very clear that this person is actively looking for a cure. So boy who commands servant to bring St. Cuthbert's shoes, monk cannot move but commands a servant to bring him a holy relic. St. Cuthbert himself appoints the person who is to care for him. So when St. Cuthbert, who later on cures all these people after death, when he himself becomes ill, he is the one who appoints someone to care for him. And that is a monk who was suffering from dysentery. So he chooses who will care for him. So that is interesting, right? There's a lot of power here. There's a lot of agency, more than you might expect from this perception of the Dark Ages. In different Anglo-Saxon miracles, certain impairments weren't understood as disabling as such. Well, we've discussed this. Literary convention leading treatment of disability. So yeah, that's another point that Marit is pointing out, the fact that a lot of it is genre. So we should always be careful in cases where we don't see agency of a person, maybe they're passive. This is not per se historical documents. You can't be 100% sure that this is how things happened, right? So the idea is more like how people understood it. So it could be that the conventions of the genre are to downplay how much agency a person had with their own cure. On the other hand, maybe in certain cases, there's an overplaying of what the person said or did in order to achieve a cure. So, when we talk about something, that's also why it's, in a way, good to specialize in what you specialize in. But, so always kind of keep that in mind. And I want to quote from her, in all these examples, the descriptions could be taken to indicate the passivity of the impaired individuals, yet the reader is informed of their directing their own care. How many other people who are carried in litters, taken, brought, or led to saints and shrines, on the surface, demonstrating passivity, were really the force behind those actions, demonstrating agency. This should stand as a reminder to historians not to accept descriptions of impaired people at face value and consider generic and lexical conventions. Important lesson. Okay, I have two more points I want to make, and then we will go to our second break. The breaks don't really mean anything to you because you can take a break whenever you want. You can press pause. But for me, yes, I just want this video to be kind of complete. So yeah, okay. So the body, this image, it's just Microsoft Photoshop has the oddest automatic images that it creates. So I just wrote body, and this is the image I got, and I thought it's quite pretty, so I used it. It's very weird. Anyway, Yes. So why body? What is a body? So there's the concept of body, right? I mean, we all know what the body is, I think. And then there's bodies, plural. Why bodies, plural? Good question. Because body is a very shifting thing. My body looks nothing, my own body looks nothing like it looked 2 years ago when I started taking certain medication that made me very fat. I mean, I was fat, but it wasn't this fat. But even, my body and the body of my son, we're both humans, but we look so different, right? He's like tiny and I'm not. But also the fact that, right, we imagine a body, we imagine 2 arms, 2 legs, 2 eyes, 2 nose, one nose, mouth. But what happens if there's a 3rd eye? What happens if there's 1 eye, right? What happens if someone is missing a limb? That's why bodies, plural. And I also constructed this very original kind of like like a kidnap letter body, but like spelt like a kidnapper letter, where they take all these like different newspaper clippings to write a sentence. So yeah, body. Yes, Judith Butler is a scholar I was referring to earlier. She talks about performance and how we are very much what we perform rather than what we are, in a way. So she talks about how bodies are wholly social rather than wholly natural. And it's something we've come back to again and again and again in this lecture. Bodies are constantly being constructed by other people. The way you look at someone, oh, they're so beautiful, but are they beautiful, or do they just conform to the understanding of the moment? Maybe in 100 years, someone will look at this video and say, wow, this guy is so skinny, because people won't be, maybe they'll be much, bigger in 100 years. Who knows? Example. Okay, so Sarah Kunzler, very important Old Norse scholar who talks about the bodies. I mentioned her earlier, but she talks about the bodies being semiotic systems. Bodies are like a system of, it sounds more complex than it is. A socially constructed system of an organization of meaning. So that sounds complex, but it's not as complex as you might imagine. Basically, are we? Well, I'm not going to get philosophical now, but our reality is constantly being negotiated. We're constantly interpreting what we see. I mean, if you know about how, I guess, the mind works and how everything, I mean, we're always negotiating. We're ascribing meaning to things, but we're also interpreting what we see, and we have a certain consensus on reality. But very often people say, maybe the blue that I see is what you see as red, but it's still blue for you, because this kind of sentences. The body sends you a message. So for instance, someone might look at me and say, oh, that guy eats a lot. I mean, yes, I mean, yeah, I mean, I do eat more than I should, but that might be a way to interpret a person. So I'm not going to go right now into separation between body and soul, but I do like the concept of body indicating some body's nature. The idea, it's called physiognomy, the idea that you can look at someone's face, and of course the Nazis also use a version of that. You can look at someone's face and say, oh, he has a big nose, he must be evil. Very often in the sagas, you'll see descriptions of people that use the physicality in order to say something about the person's character. And again, this goes back to Sarah Kunzler and how the body is interpretable. Another text that I would really want you to look at if you have time is Roberto Magnani and Diane Watts, Towards a Queer Philology. I believe it's open access. If not, contact me. Post-Medieval, it's a journal, very Pomo journal. Sorry. And specifically in this issue, volume, it's all dedicated to queer philology. The idea that, well, I'm not going to go into queer philology right now because this is not that kind of class, but just know that there's a lot of debate about how the body is very tied to the texts as we read them. And instead of just, giving this general faint sentence, this is a really good example. So yeah, manuscripts are made of animal skin, right? I mean, medieval manuscripts are all made of animal skin, and that's something we need to remember. This was a living animal that was slaughtered or died, I guess, in some cases, but usually slaughtered and turned into a manuscript. And this kind of tangibility, the fact that that you can sometimes even see the hair follicles, right? Sometimes you can even see the hair, I guess. But yeah, you can see the hair follicles. You can see the skin. You can see that you are interacting with skin. And the idea is that some medieval scribes actually interacted with that. So in this case, like you can see the character of this physician in a Chaucer manuscript. You can see him kind of through the other page. You can kind of almost anticipate the text that's coming, but you can also kind of feel what's happening, but it's like he's already present in a way. But it also reminds you that, you're talking about the physicality, you're talking about a physician, but you're also looking at a body. And this is a funny, cute, but also sad example, is that here you have this cute little what's it called? You have this cute little sheep drawn around a certain circle, a flaw in the manuscript, but then you realize, I mean, it's the sheep around the things that reminds you that this was actually a piece of skin. And that's why you have this flaw, because it was a piece of skin, and skin isn't perfect. And when you stretch it out, then yeah, that's what happens. And it's kind of grim, but it's also kind of funny. So this was supposed to be the first break now, but we are going to now take our second break.